Prepositions of place really want to live in peace. Unfortunately, we humans don't let them. So all three are going to be fairly different with their interpretation of space, but we are going to also talk about the behavior. So we already know that in has a very particular meaning, on has a very particular meaning, and at also has a particular meaning, but there is something different about at. So that's why we're going to put a little asterisk over here, and we're going to discuss at last. Now, I hope this doesn't come as a surprise, but we as humans live in a three-dimensional space. 3 dimensions is what we are interacting with on a daily basis. Now, this is very important because as long as an object has a physical manifestation in 3D or has a singular relationship with another object in 3D, those two prepositions in and on are very easy to understand. An example, this particular marker is in my hand. You see, marker, singular object, hand, singular object, and they have a singular relationship in 3D. As such, it's a fairly simple interpretation of preposition of place. Marker in my hand. If I'm going to change a spatial relationship between those two objects, all I have to do is change preposition to on. And so I could easily say right now, well, this marker is on my hand. So you see, this is a fairly simple interpretation of prepositions of place with regards to three-dimensional objects and the relationship between them. At is also dealing with 3D naturally, but it's doing things a little bit differently because it's using physical object or a manifestation of an object as a reference point. Now, that doesn't mean that at is inaccurate. On the contrary, it's incredibly accurate because it's actually using a particular object. So how does it translate into a 3D reality? To understand at, we are going to have a look at this particular example. We are going to take two objects into account, desk and a person, and we are going to use those 2 bullet points to start with. We know that both have physical manifestation, person and desk. However, the second bullet point is not as straightforward because it's going to be very difficult for us to determine a single spatial relationship between those 2 elements in space. So we know that, let's say, the head is above the desk, the hands are on the desk, legs are under the desk, the torso is behind the desk. So now the question is, okay, so where is that person? Because in a way you could say, well, that person is everywhere. It's above, it's behind, it's under, it's on. But what we could do is we could use one object, desk, as a physical reference point, and from that reference point position the person and say, well, that person is at a desk. And that makes everything so much easier and very accurate, in fact, because you don't need to worry about in, under, above, behind. So you see, this is really why a lot of people have problems with at, and they have no idea how to use it. But this is only a part of a story. We as humans, a lot of the times, apply relationships with regards to elements which do not have physical manifestations. And this is where there is another layer of interpretation of all those prepositions, because suddenly they change from 3D into a fairly abstract concept of space. I hope you're going to excuse my drawing skills, but for our example, let's assume that this is Australia. And let's keep this example fairly simple. You see, I'm going to have a relationship between Australia and 2 other locations such as Alice Springs and Fraser Island. If I am going to interpret Australia from the perspective of 3-dimensional physical manifestation of an object, such as a continent in this case, then I have to conclude that Alice Springs finds itself on that continent. And I have to also conclude that Fraser Island finds itself of that continent. But that's a fairly strange way of looking at elements which have human names. You have a different interpretation of Australia because you see Australia not only as a continent but also as a country. And now you see things change completely because within that interpretation both elements belong inside of the concept of the country of Australia. So when you ask me where is Fraser Island, I will say in Australia. But you see that in really doesn't represent a three-dimensional space, because in three-dimensional space Fraser Island is not in, it is off. So you can see that prepositions of place can be really interpreted on many different levels. I hope this video managed to answer some of your questions, and I'm pretty sure it raised some other. Thank you for watching, and we hope you've just found English that little bit easier. Happy learning, and see you in the next video.